quick check-in with everybody about how everything went last week or the rest of the last 7 days with the homework. As well as just, any of the reflections that you did following last week's call. So I'd love to just give everybody the opportunity to share one insight that they had from the last 7 days. If you have multiple insights, that's great. You can share that too. But if you want to share at least one insight, that would be great. A big part of how we learn is hearing from each other, hearing what resonates with them, what other organizations are doing. So sharing is a big part of this. So I will let everybody take a second to unmute, and I'll just start calling people. I'll just go on my list, the top of my list. So it looks like, Roberto, you are top of my list. You'd like to share an insight that you had from last week. I can't hear you, Roberto, if you are speaking. Okay, we'll come back to you at the end. I'll move on to my list. So we have Vivian from World Trade Center.
Hi, I'm just trying to find where I put my notes. I guess what I found just in doing the homework was I was a little bit confused about the different levels in the mapping. Just okay. From seeing the different examples in other people's work, I guess to me the way that I saw it, there was 4 levels where there was the top level, and then there was kind of like 2 columns underneath, and I'm not sure if there's actually 2 columns or if I misinterpreted that, and then the third being the sentiment, the feeling. Mm-hmm. So I'd appreciate some clarification around that.
Yeah, that's a great question for you. So there are it's exactly as you described. So there's like the top level, which is the main thing that they're doing, and then you're getting to the more granular how they're doing it. So maybe it's maybe you're doing like research or something, and then they're going onto the different channels. It's usually where you would indicate if there's multiple channels with multiple ways of accomplishing that particular task. So
there are 2 columns then, like this kind of like the first column, which is the general idea of what's being done, like how you would have taken the steps, and then the second column is a little bit more granular if there's different ways of doing that, or that one thing can be accomplished in several ways. Is that how you?
Yeah. So it can either be like in the example here. I'll just make it a little bit bigger so that you can see it. There we go. Scooch over. There may not always be, like on this example, we've got the yellow is how they would complete that search. And then they have in this example, the pink is like an additional information about that. So in this particular example, they had, just some comments about it. Like it was inconsistent or there's not enough traffic. That's one example. We also have in the example here from Jacqueline and Jennifer, they occasionally, like I said, you may not always have something, but they have like the questions, like the research questions here. So they have the research options, and then on the right column, they had, do you go with an established insurance company or with a direct to customer company? So just like a little bit more about how the user is thinking about it. So that's where you can put in like, how the user is thinking about it. If there's multiple channels, if they can contact the broker, I think they have here over to the right, contacting a broker. And you could do it either in call or in person. So Vivian, once you've put yours together, I'd be happy to review it and give you some feedback, or we can even work on it together on our coaching call.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Natalie, you're next on my list, also from the same organization.
I guess we signed up at the same time, so we're on the list together. Yeah, no, I think Vivian and I worked on ours together, so I think it's going well. I think it's what I've appreciated from the course last week is just I feel like it's timely for us. I think it's important to really dig into the customer experience at, I think we're doing a really good job at certain stages, and then there's a little one stage along the way that there's a dip. So it's we've identified that, and I think it's important that to be aware and fix it.
That's amazing that you've identified that, you know, it's very difficult to have a consistent experience across an entire journey. There's almost always going to be points in that journey where there's friction, because maybe it's being handed off from one team to the next, or you're dependent on the customer to take some action or something. So there's almost always going to be some friction along the journey, but knowing that is the first step, and then you can identify different ways to resolve that. Sometimes it's very easy. It's like for us in our organization, we had friction at the sales cycle to handing off to the customer success team. And so we just reworked that little handoff piece, streamlined it, and it's made a huge difference. So sometimes you can also find like really easy solutions or something that has a high impact. Okay, great. Let's see who's next on my list. Angela.
I've just noticed that I haven't done, I can't kind of like started my homework, but when I looked at Ashley's, it's exactly what I was going to word it. so like I said, I've done nothing.
That's okay. It's okay. I totally understand. I did take a look at Ashley's and Jennifer and Jacqueline's, and I did just put some additional questions in there just for things for you to think about. It wasn't necessarily that it was missing in the journey map. It's just when you see the journey map down, it's just naturally it sometimes additional questions.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, last week I was a little bit confused on how the journey mapping will start. So, and then, I mean, and I had issues getting on there. So it was kind of like a little bit of a rush this morning because I was in a lot of meetings. But like the mapping what Ashley kind of like put together, it's basically the things I do. So.
Well, if you want to put yours together or any different thoughts different to Ashley's perspective, I would happily review that once that's up there.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Ashley, do you want to go next?
So I actually found it a lot more difficult to do this map than the example one we did of like going to a grocery store during COVID. And I think honestly, it was for a couple of reasons. Like one is because the first couple of steps I found a lot easier because that's what my team is, like my department is responsible for. But then it gets to the point where it hands off to Angela and our recruitment folks. And so I was less clear on the process there. So that made it more difficult. But also I didn't have the firsthand experience as a like potential member doing this. So I think it, like my takeaway would have been is that when we apply this, like actually try to apply this, you know, to our work planning on the job, it can't just be one person doing it. We should be getting customer input and input from different teams so that we're getting all the perspectives in there. So
that's great. That's really insightful, Ashley. And as you evolve these journey maps, you can then start to put which team owns which part of the process, and then you'll see where all of the handoffs are, and you can evaluate how those handoffs are happening. Are they straightforward? Are they streamlined? Or are they creating friction? Also, something that's always great to do is to try to experience it as your customer would. So it's hard when you're already in an organization sometimes because you know how something is supposed to work. But if you can take yourself out of it, or even ask your friends or family members to go through the journey and to report back, document it all for you, that's really helpful too, to see, is it actually being delivered as it should be delivered? And is it being experienced as you would expect it to be experienced?
And one thing I actually struggle with, and it's because I didn't know how to do it. And I'm hoping you can understand, like could tell me. And it does kind of address your questions here. It's this path I did was the ideal path, but because I wasn't sure how to display if they aren't approved, like how does it create a second like spring of the journey? So would you do a whole separate map, or would you just sort of like separate it into path A and path B? Like I wasn't sure how to visually display that.
Yeah. So the version I shared with you guys and that we were working on is kind of like the most basic, easiest version as a way to orient you to journey mapping. I will have that as a takeaway for myself to pull you some samples of more complex ones where you break them out into like diverging paths. But they do look different. So in this case, to keep it, if you're working with a group of stakeholders and you didn't want it to be too complicated, you could just duplicate it and then change the journey. If you just have two paths, get accepted or not accepted, then you could just have one journey. It's called your accepted journey, and one path that's called your not accepted path or journey.
Right. Thank you.
There's different ways. The other ways kind of start to look more like process maps, which is why I don't start with those, because we're trying to get the concept of it's not a process map. So visually representing it that way, but I do have someone I can show you, Ashley.
Oh, great. That'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, I like the idea of keeping it simple for now, but
Yeah.
it's rarely simple in practice. So it's good to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, make a note on that. Okay. Ben. Oh, we lost Ben. Okay. Kai. Do you have any insights from last week?
Well, I'm just catching up because
Okay.
I was unable to think, but I logged on to the Mural and I had a look at the software and started building out a particular journey. I've done this before, so. But it's interesting to see how others are doing it. So this is good. I've used another product, which, yeah, it does essentially the same thing. It's UX Expressia.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know, it seems like the templates were maybe just a little easier to work with, but I guess one tool versus another, it's just a concept. What was interesting, it's interesting to see the different levels of how you sort of evolve this. And it will, I've seen some interesting demos by them where you can actually pull in real live data. So you're actually measuring, in some instances, like data as it relates to actual journey experiences. So that was kind of an interesting example of like really leading edge processes. So in that particular instance, you basically it was almost like turning into not just a map, but it was almost like a reporting tool kind of concept as well. So just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's great. There are definitely a handful of products out there that exist specifically for journey mapping. What we're using here is Mural, and it's really to
Yes.
in-person whiteboarding, and
it was
great for the really robust, really the stronger, more mature CX teams that
and I used a template. They actually had a template that I don't know if that was the template you were getting every people to use, and I thought the template in Mural was actually pretty good. So that was a thing that I used.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a look at that. There is in Mural there is a journey mapping template, which is much more complex than the one that we are doing here. So I can show that to you guys as well. Okay, great. Jacqueline.
Yeah, so the whole idea of process mapping is pretty familiar to Jen and I through Lean. That's kind of become a bigger part of our company over the last couple of years. What Lean doesn't do is layer the emotions of the customer onto it. So I think that was kind of, a natural next step to what we had become familiar with and really spoke to us there. What challenged me a little bit is is putting kind of like parameters around looking at one process individually. Because if we look at like the residential application process, thinking it's like a basic policy, new homeowner, you're coming into the process of getting home insurance, usually as part of the home purchase process. So it's usually at the end, you know, most people, you know, companies require you to have proof of insurance in order to secure your mortgage, in order to finalize your house purchase. And that's kind of the time when you're dealing with like a lot of like closing costs and like decision fatigue and all those kind of things. So you're almost starting our process from a space of, you know, you're irritated. So it's like you're coming in with like a pre-built, you know, I'm annoyed I have to spend more money on this. It's a grudge purchase. That's what we call it a lot. It's not something people really can ever get excited about. So like our goal, I think, is to identify those pain points and make them as painless as possible. But we're also always struggling with, it's not an exciting or, you know, glamorous purchase by any means. So I think that's something that I think is I'd like to look at how one process kind of feeds into and affects the next process, both kind of in and out.
That's great. You'll often see these micro journeys, which is kind of what you're talking about, is the insurance purchase is often is a micro journey and a larger journey of which you're just a small portion of it. An interesting challenge to your organization would be, how could you make this a happy experience for your customers? How could you surprise and delight them so that way maybe they're talking about it to their friends, because a lot of people do ask for insurance recommendations from their friends. I know my friends was like, hey, I have to get new insurance. Who's your provider? You know, so maybe that's an opportunity to explore from an experience perspective as we move forward.
And you think, if we think of it as kind of like more of like a macro experience of like all the different touch points we have in a company, I think we really, based on our, you know, satisfaction scores, we really differentiate ourselves at the claim experience. But that's only because you're taking a bad experience of experiencing a loss, and our claim adjusters do really well at empathizing with our customers and treating them as human beings. So if you have, you know, the unfortunate experience of experiencing a loss and making a claim with us, then is usually when we get a lot of our supporters. But, you know, that's only going to happen for a certain subset of people, although with this weather, it's a lot more. So that's kind of a challenge too, is like how would we go about making that a good experience? And maybe that's just through our brokers who represent us.
There's a lot of good things we can explore there for sure. Maybe we'll tackle some of those when we talk about the strategy piece. I think today we'll start to be able to look at that. Jennifer, anything to add?
Sorry, just going off mute. Yeah, I unfortunately wasn't there last time, but I did get up to speed from Jacqueline a little bit on this and looked at this mapping with her. So just like she mentioned, a lot of similarities to lean, so that was good, with the emotion layered in. And I think where I struggled maybe kind of along the lines of what Jacqueline mentioned, is like where do you actually start and stop a process? And I think that's just, you know, you could be really detailed or broad in the process. So I think I'm just looking forward to kind of learning a little more about that.
Sure, great, thanks. And Roberto, we've got you on. Not, we can move on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Nice. Okay, so last week I had a little issue with my health. I needed to go to the doctor, so I couldn't be on the last part of the workshop. But I did take some ideas with me. We're a software company that develop solutions for end users, but we also have corporate clients that buy our services. So we have like the two approaches to client experience. We're very focused on providing end users like with the best user interfaces and with the best experiences online, but we still have a lot of opportunities on the onboarding process of new clients that purchase our services. So I think one of the things that we're going to be working more strongly is on improving the onboarding process, how those clients that come in want to stay with us for the next 10 years. I think that's one of the the main ideas I take with me. And I never worked with Mural before, so really nice tool, and for sure that will help us to start writing down that how that onboarding process will look for our clients.
Yeah, so that's great, Roberto, that you've identified that you want to work on the onboarding journey. I would start by documenting the current onboarding journey before you look at the future state. That will help you identify the high impact areas, the areas of friction as well. You'll need to know what the current state is as you're implementing a new journey or, reimagining it. Once you get to the execution phase, knowing what it is currently will be really helpful. So once you have a chance to take a crack at it, I'd be happy to take a look at it for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So that was all some great insights, some great conversations that will lead us in nicely into the kind of the second part of today's session. Today, we are going to look at the employee experience a little bit. I'm going to kind of cruise through some of that stuff, but it's really important to talk about the connection that the employee has to delivering that differentiated customer experience. We're going to dive into really it's the strategy side of things, the strategy that you can set or define for your experience. We're going to spend some time there. Keep in mind that these tools I'm introducing you to are they're very basic. They're, for kind of an introductory level of customer experience. You can evolve them as you need to, depending on your organization's specific maturity. So I will give you a tool that you can use to get started on documenting your strategy. And then if we have time, we'll start to dive into the CX KPIs that are really kind of high level. Those are very dependent on kind of your organization's maturity, what you're able to track, things like that. If you want to dive further into metrics, that would be a great topic for our one-on-one coaching calls. Okay. So we talked a little bit about this last week, but brand, employee experience, and customer experience they're interconnected. Essentially, your customers are experiencing what your employees are delivering, which should be delivered based on what your brand promise is. So a lot of connections between employees, brand, and customer experience here. And we're going to dive a little bit more into employee experience. And if you didn't get a chance to watch the video that I had posted for this week's learning challenge, it's about employee experience. And you can leverage a lot of the concepts that we use here in CX to reimagine your employee experience if it needs some work. Okay, so essentially, employees are the heroes who are delivering your customer's experience. So it's so important to make sure that the way you engage with your employees is well defined, but also make sure there's a feedback mechanism to hear from your employees, because your employees are going to, especially your frontline employees, are going to have significant insights about your customers and the experience that they are having. And so just a quick definition to help you delineate between employee experience and employee engagement. It's another one of those terms that I find is used interchangeably, but it isn't actually the same. So the employee experience is the journey that an employee takes while working with your organization. And that employee experience starts as early as a job posting that's been posted, goes through the entire recruitment cycle to how they're onboarded, how they're managed day to day, how changes are communicated to them, how compensation discussions happen, performance reviews, all of that, how feedback is shared. And then if they do decide to leave, how that offboarding happens, or if they're promoted, how that promotion happens. So it's very similar to customer experience in that regard, in that it's a journey that starts either when they first start to interact with you or often even before then. and it continues a long time past their last interaction with you. Employee engagement, however, is an ongoing part of the employee experience. An employee engagement is a goal or an outcome. So your goal is to have engaged employees. You'll often hear employee engagement or employee satisfaction used interchangeably, and those are more closely connected than employee experience. So in most cases, your employees are the ones that are delivering the experience to your customers. Therefore, they need to see themselves as contributing to that customer experience. They need to understand their role, what the standards are, what's expected of them, and then how to share the feedback to their managers or to the organization as they get that from employees. And I alluded to this on our last call, that if you are delivering a customer experience that isn't very good, then there's a good chance that your employee experience is also not very good, because it isn't very satisfying for employees to have to be on the front end or the front line of delivering an experience and interacting with customers when they aren't happy. So there is often a correlation between the employee experience and the customer experience. And likewise, if your employee experience is bad, that's likely going to be reflected in how your customers are experiencing their interactions with your employees. So again, very, very closely linked. And so everybody has a role to play in delivering the customer experience, whether they are on the front lines or maybe they're in the back office. Everything is connected. And one of the challenges I often give to my clients is to have people who are on this course start talking to people in other teams and asking them to define how their role connects to the customer. So if you have a customer experience problem, maybe your NPS scores are low, or you have higher turnover than is standard in your industry, there's a good chance that something's breaking down at multiple levels. And so checking in with all of your different teams and asking them how what they're doing connects directly to the customer will start to reveal some interesting insights. And if they can't articulate how their role connects to the customer, then that's part of the problem. So helping your employees understand how they connect to the customer is really important. And thinking about how you can build that into their job descriptions, how you can build that into their performance evaluations, always making sure that there's a customer related metric and that they understand what that is and how to measure it and report on it. Okay, so I'm going to just show you a slide here and just take, 30 seconds to just look at the image that I have and see if you can identify what the potential problem might be with this.
Well, I'd say you probably shouldn't fine someone for dying. That seems unreasonable.
Yeah. So this is a true story. This isn't like something that's made up. This is actually how Virgin Media would indicate when there was a change to an invoice because somebody had died. And so the executor or the family member is getting this bill, and this is what they're seeing. It can be very difficult on those customers or their dependents to see this, and it really demonstrates a complete lack of empathy. But what it also articulates is that somewhere along the way, the people in, say, the back office, if you want to call it that, if it was on the finance team or maybe on the technical team, when they were coding something and they set up that description in their system, obviously they weren't thinking about it from a customer first perspective. So this is just like a great little example to show people, to help them understand how somebody who isn't in a customer facing role actually does connect to the customer. I saw Vivian had raised a hand.
Yeah, it's a question about the last slide. So are you-
Oh, sure.
yeah, I'm just wondering if, do you have an example? You mentioned that it would be a good thing to incorporate in someone's job description, how their job ties into the client experience. If it's someone that's removed from that experience directly, can you give some examples of how that might be worded, or
Yeah, so
some
it
examples
depends.
of how that would work?
It depends on the role, but like a great example is in the finance team, because they are almost always very removed from the customer. So something like, depends on how your performance reviews are worded in general, or your job descriptions, but invoicing is often, as you can see here, invoicing or bills are often a problem. So helping them understand, like maybe it's a timeliness thing. So you make sure all invoices are done on a timely basis. And then I would put like the back half of the sentence to be something like, so that the customer is always aware of, you know, what they owe or has the most current information, something like that. But like always trying to add the word customer in. So whatever it is that you're asking them to do, whatever that goal is, trying to build in that connection to the customer by using the word customer is helpful. You could also, depending on like what your approach to voice of the customer is, there may be in your voice of the customer program an area that actually evaluates that part of the service, that part of the experience. So they could have a metric then tied to, if it was an NPS or a customer effort score. So maybe you're like evaluating the invoicing process itself, and you're going to complete a customer effort survey at some point to assess how well you're doing. Then you could have a metric associated or tied to the results of the customer effort score. So it really depends on the particular role, but start by just even using the word customer, or user, whatever your language is. Maybe it's client, member, having that built in. Another way, this is more at a macro level, if you have a really well-defined voice of the customer program, would be having each team have a metric or a KPI assigned, or that is generated from that voice of the customer program. So you could have like, you'll see, I'm reluctant to say NPS. NPS is pretty complicated and I think is overused, but underrepresents, or it doesn't give the best feedback. But even if you are using NPS or customer effort score, you could have like a corporate metric that everybody gets measured against, so that they are always seeing that there's some connection to what they're doing and it impacting the customer.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we looked at this last week. It's very, just let me, this is not showing as well as it was last week. So just see if I can make this a little bit better. We talked about the 3 core elements of an experience. So we talked about the accessibility, the functional component, as well as the emotional. And so much of that emotional piece is the result of what your employees are doing, what they are saying, how quickly they're responding, their tone. Are they picking up the phone? Are they sending an email? Are they doing on chat? Are they acting human, or does it feel robotic? So the emotional piece is directly connected to your employee experience. And when you think about your strategy and what type of experience you want to deliver, you also have to think about the type of employees then that you need to recruit. And so what a customer feels is most likely what they're going to remember. So when we had that journey map and we had that emotional component at the bottom, thinking about the emotions and how they're feeling, start to think about that. That's what they're going to remember. If they're going to remember the feeling, I felt frustrated because it was very difficult to do, or it took me 10 minutes instead of 5 minutes, but they're going to remember first and foremost what they felt. They felt elated, they felt surprised, they felt delight. And they're very good at remembering the very good things or the very bad things. So the negative, the really negative feelings or the really positive feelings. The neutral feelings, they're less likely to remember those feelings specifically. They'll just remember they were neutral about the experience. But if it was really good or really bad, they'll remember how they were feeling. And if it was due to an interaction within a person, they're probably going to remember it even more, because it takes on that really like a personal sort of connection, person to person. They will feel that even if your employee is delivering it exactly as intended or as designed, it will still feel very personal to them, because we're humans and we're irrational and we're very emotional. So always remembering that your customers will remember what they feel, and we're also all different. So we also internalize things differently and we feel things differently. So when you design an experience, thinking about how it could be interpreted by different customers or different personas, and how they might interpret that action and what they might feel as a result. Just do a quick time check. Okay, so customers especially feel it when they aren't the heart of your business, or they aren't the center of your business. They aren't what's important. They really, really feel that. And that impacts their buying decisions. And we know based on several studies that as each year passes, the buying decision is becoming more and more emotional because there's so much choice. So customers have a lot of options. There's a lot of competitors or substitute solutions out there. And so the impact of particularly negative experiences is becoming a bigger driver to loyalty than it was before. And there was a study done by Walker Customer Experience in 2019 that shows that in 2019, 2020 became the first year where the experience actually outweighed the actual product or service in the buying decision. So it was the number one factor in determining who they were buying with and how long they were staying. And so that was a shift. And so that will continue to evolve over the next several years and will continue to be a trend in the CX space. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about customer centricity. So customer centricity is really about putting the customers at the heart of everything you do. It's easier said than done. It's very, very difficult to be a customer-centric organization. And it really only happens by design. So it needs to be a strategic decision. There needs to be a plan to actually make this happen. Simply saying you are customer-centric or you want to be customer-centric will not make it happen. I've been a part of an organization before where we set that as our strategy, but we had absolutely no plan on how to make it happen, and really just thought that by saying we were customer-centric, it would just happen. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a strategy and plan in place. But the benefits of being customer-centric are increased customer satisfaction, increased loyalty, revenue, profitability, and sustainability long-term. Businesses that are customer-centric generally have a better outlook than their competitors do, and they generally outperform their competitors. And when we talk about profitability, you can also use customer experience or customer centricity to help reduce your costs, because often delivering an experience in a customer-centric way is actually cost-effective based on studies. So the ultimate aspiration is not to understand that there's an experience that can be designed and delivered, is rather to actually design and deliver it in a truly customer-centric way. by always acting in the best interests of the customer. We'll talk about some ways in which you can do that. So what do you see here? Most people are probably just seeing an empty chair.
I see a very comfortable chair.
A very comfortable chair. It looks like the chair I'm sitting on right now. But really, what it is a symbol. And it's Amazon's symbol of the customer. So Amazon, from the very beginning, a core part of their strategy was all about obsessing over the customer experience and building a truly customer-centric organization or business. How they did that was always having a representation of the customer in the room. And they would do that by having this empty chair in the room as a symbol of representing the customer. So when they would make decisions, they would have strategic conversations, they would be working through a problem, they would look to that chair and see it as a symbol of the customer and as a reminder that they needed to solve the problem by putting the customers first. Other organizations choose different symbols. If your organization wants to go down this path of becoming customer-centric, you could think about a symbol that might resonate with your employees and how you could incorporate that into your business. There's some additional challenges now that we're in this hybrid sort of work model. So figuring that out. I've done it before where we have like a customer minute at the top of every meeting. And that's actually modeled after the mining industry, where they have a safety minute at the top of every meeting to help build this culture of safety in mining. So you could do that same thing, but with customer centricity. We have a customer minute at the top of every meeting. And maybe you're sharing feedback that you've heard from a customer, either good or bad, sharing a customer challenge, sharing something that you heard from another cross-functional team about how they interact with customers, whatever that is. You could have a customer minute. You could have something, a visual cue. Maybe everybody has their Zoom backdrop and it has like a picture of the target customer or something like that. There's many different ways you can get really creative to bring that to your team, but having a symbol and making sure that you're always talking about the customers is a key part of building a customer-centric organization. So I have just a couple of little models here to help articulate this concept a little further around building a truly customer-centric culture. This is one model, incorporating the customer feedback, mapping the journey, refining your operating model or your business model to ensure it's customer-centric, making sure that you're aligning all of your technologies and processes to support and drive customer engagement, engaging the executives and leaders. A great way of helping move this forward at the executive or the leadership table, making sure that everybody has a common understanding of customer experience, making sure that everybody around the leadership team table has a set of metrics associated with the delivery of customer experience, making sure that the strategy is focused around the target areas of the experience that you're wanting to deliver, as well as securing that behavior change if that's what's required. If behavior change is required, it'll likely be required at multiple levels. Simply asking the frontline employees to make a change will not be sufficient because it needs to be reinforced and modeled by all levels of leadership. Really considering how to integrate all of the unique business units. So I always think of customer experience as being flat across the organization. And really each team has a role to play in the delivery of the customer experience. And I see it, more flat as opposed to as a vertical. So thinking about how you could have that represented in your organization depending on your structure. Do you have a customer experience kind of tiger team that's cross-functional in nature where everybody sorry, each team has at least one person who's trained in customer experience, who sits on this team and can be there to be the advocate for their team and how they could deliver the customer experience and could bring any challenges that they're hearing from the dedicated CX team back into their disparate business units. So thinking that through, how to achieve transformation from the top to the bottom, as well as the measures or metrics that we already briefly touched on. I like this particular model. There are others. Here's another one. This is from Gartner. There's many different ones out there. The other thing to just think about is becoming customer-centric is a journey. It is not going to happen overnight. So thinking about how your organization is going to respond and which of these 10 areas or which of these 10 areas you want to start with, and how to identify quick wins, how to keep everybody informed about the progress you're making. There was about 10 years ago, as customer experience really started to evolve, there was a lot of investments being made on kind of customer experience or customer centric transformations. And they were failing because they were really, really large. They were like these massive undertakings that just really hadn't been broken down at a granular level. And they were failing because leaders were getting tired of waiting to see the results. Employees were having change fatigue. The measures or the metrics that they had in place weren't micro enough to measure the incremental improvements. So the one piece of guidance I would give here is really to just break it down and identify outcomes you can achieve along the way to customer centricity, and having quick wins, measuring impact of projects before and after, so you can demonstrate these incremental successes so people get excited and you can build momentum instead of it feeling daunting and overwhelming. It's just, I like these little comics from Marketunist. I don't know if you follow Marketunist, but they're always pretty spot on. This is just a great way to articulate that cross-functional connection and how a customer is trying to just complete something that's very easy, but from the delivery side of things is actually the result of 5 or 7 teams pulling together and having that really consistent, well thought out and well executed journey that's working. And how when it isn't working, it's experienced by a customer in a negative way. Okay, I'll pause here momentarily. Any questions? And I can't see anybody. I minimized this somehow and I can't see anybody. So is everybody still good? I'll just give you guys a second to come off mute and ask any questions.
I had a quick question.
Go ahead, Lori.
One of the things I was interested in is we have a few different systems and we're trying to kind of streamline them. Does this marry with Trello, or could you merge this into Trello? Do you know, or is it good to just keep this as its separate own thing when mapping things out or engaging the rest of the group? Or are you familiar with Trello?
I am familiar with Trello. So Trello is like really the
maybe you can hold that question if now's not the right time for it.
Okay, I'm going to think on that one because I think it really depends on what you're trying to deliver and what role Trello is playing, because I don't know about you, but I've taken a lot of tools and modified them for my own use.
Yeah.
I use HubSpot as essentially my customer experience management tool for the moment with Gazelle, even though that's not its intended purpose. Because we're just a small company and we can't buy a super expensive one. So I'll think on that and maybe we can take that one even offline and see how you're using Trello.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Roberto.
So I think one of the things that most impacts the customer experience is a little bit of the subcultures within the company.
Mhm.
So each team has a different approach to customer experience. And when you try to build something across the whole company, it becomes a little challenge to make everybody get on the same boat. Because again, each team sometimes has its own priorities,
Mhm.
its own challenges, its own style of leadership. So what are your ideas on getting buy-in from all the teams regarding their internal, what I call subcultures?
So that's a really good question. And it comes back to this concept of customer centricity and making sure that the customer experience is a strategic imperative, that it's owned at the leadership level, that there's like at least one of the most senior people in the organization that owns customer experience. And certainly they'll have, somebody that's probably working on it for them. But if it isn't actually owned by an executive, and I see this happen a lot where there'll be, a manager of customer experience or a director of customer experience. Meanwhile, all of the other functional areas have a more senior leader represented at the table, like a VP of marketing or a VP of finance. Yet customer experience doesn't have a seat at the table. So the first thing would be to make sure that CX has a senior leader who's responsible for it, owns it, it's a priority for them, and they have a seat at the table. That would be the very first thing that I would recommend probably looking at. You'll see it a lot when you see job postings and stuff too. There's almost hardly ever any VP of CX roles. Almost always posted at the director level still, especially in Canada. So it's still, this is a common problem that we're seeing right now, is that there isn't enough leadership ownership of CX. And that just, without that, then all of these subcultures continue to operate and they don't have delivery standards in place. They don't have concise experience that's designed, let alone executed properly. And so we're going to actually that's a nice question leading us into strategy. So we can move over into strategy if there's no other questions. Okay, so again, some of these are really simple in the way that they're done. This is these tools or these models, and it's just they're really basic introductions to these concepts. And you could do entire like full day sessions or more on each of these concepts. So this is kind of the intro course to CX related concepts. So just keep that in mind. And if your organization is more mature in one of these areas and you want to get deeper, we can certainly do that in our coaching calls. So we're going to talk about CX strategy as well as measurement. And we've already been talking about the people. These are pieces that all fit together to form your CX strategy. You need to be clear on who your customers are. Do you have a clear understanding of what they need from you? Like truly, and I'll give you an example. This is something that we're working through right now at Gazelle, is we have a really clear understanding of what we're selling, how we're selling it, how we're training our customers to use it. But we don't have a clear understanding on is what do they need from us? And we're actually seeing that reflected, that exact issue is being reflected in our churn numbers. So we have higher than expected churn. And when we get, like, as we've drilled into it and we've done some really exhaustive churn interviews, it's really coming back to this key question. And we're not actually selling something or delivering something that they really need. So making sure that you've got that clarity of what do your customers need and are you delivering it? And then making sure that everyone knows the role they have to play to deliver that experience. And again, these are very, very basic. Thinking about the measurement, what is the journey and how do you deliver it? How do you execute it? How do you measure it? There might be some limitations. Often there are, especially in smaller organizations where you don't have like a really large budget, technology budget, or maybe you just are new and the maturity isn't there. You don't have all of these measures in place. So thinking about how you could measure it now and how you could evolve that measurement over time. And we've already kind of talked about the people side of things. Here's just another little visual representation of how you need to connect your business purpose with your business strategy and your customer strategy with your customer experience. Really, everything needs to be hanging together. So you can't really define a CX strategy in isolation without considering the business strategy. Everything hangs together. So this is a super, super simple kind of strategy on a page. Now, this is just kind of a way to do a quick and dirty. It's an introduction to the different elements that you need to consider when designing a strategy. And for today, we're really going to focus on the right side, which is the strategy and the tactics. And here, to make it even easier, we've got 6 different areas to consider. These are the most common areas. These are the things that are most important to customers when they're making those buying decisions. And that's based on the findings that I shared with you last week. So I figured the easiest way to introduce you to this would be for us to work as a group and to complete just this right side of this canvas today. And we will complete it imagining we're looking at Starbucks. So I'm going to just go over into Mural here and we'll work on this as a group. And then don't worry, you'll get time to work on these on your own as well. Okay. So everybody can come off mute. That's okay. Just gonna set this up in a way we can all see this here. Okay, can everybody see that middle section here? Okay, let's see if I can make it a little bigger. Perfect. So we'll just use the stickies. We'll talk about it as a group and I'll place the stickies. And we'll use, if it's something positive, then we'll use color green. And if it's something negative, then we'll use the orange to show that to you. So I'll just start with the green one. Basically, so what I'm looking for here is just based on how we experience Starbucks, how would we define their strategy? And I'm using the color coding, just like if we think their strategy is something, but they're not doing it very well, then we can put the color code, but that makes it a little bit more complicated. But it's also good, to just think about it that way too. Are they doing it well or not doing it well? It's an area that they need to look at. Area of opportunity, things like that. Is that clear? So do we have any thoughts on the brand promise or the brand alignment that Starbucks has created? Everybody can just kind of come off mute, and we're a small group, so have thoughts.
I think they're all about the tailored experience. from putting your name on your cup to, you know, being able to basically create your own drink in the app.
Nice. Okay. Great. I'll also put that sometimes there's this concept of stacking, and you'll see that some items will fit under multiple categories because of this concept of stacking. Okay, I was going to say that's like exactly what you want when you want it. Anybody have other?
I think they've also tried to be unique, like they've kind of created their own language in terms of the sizes and the baristas, and it's, you know, coffee shops didn't used to use the language that they do. So in terms of customer experience, that uniqueness, I think, is kind of what might be novel, but it's also probably attractive to a customer.
Thanks, Lori. I think they're really innovative. And they lead the way, like they set the new expectation. Like they're the disruptors, I find, in the experience space, along with a handful of others. Their thoughts on any of the others? And one thing I've noticed, like from an empathy perspective, they're super friendly. If there's an issue, it's like no questions asked. I've often had it, you know, where I'll like get a drink and it might be, not often, but on occasion it's been made wrong, but I've already left the store, and then I come up to another store and I'll go in and they, you know, will like, take it back, make me another one, like no questions asked.
Yeah.
they'll let you keep the one that they made.
Oh
wrong.
yeah.
Yeah. From the traditional customer experience, like they're very good, right? Like they're pleasant, they greet you, if it's not exactly what you want, they'll just redo it. And
I didn't put one other one. They use your name.
I think they also kind of play up a little bit of the exclusivity angle. Like they have that like secret menu, or, you know, you have to, you know about it to know to ask for it kind of thing. So it's not something
They have a secret menu?
Yeah.
Gosh.
It's like yeah, you have to know about it. And I don't even know how you get to know about it.
like if you want the Tronta size, like the 30-ounce drink, it's not actually on the menu. It stops at Venti, but there is a 30. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
I would say like the membership, like the app, and getting a free drink on your birthday, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
They clearly make really good use of the customer data that they have, because the app will give you like customized recommendations based on what you've purchased, as opposed to just, you know, buy this new bar. It's you've bought these. This is on sale this week. So.
Okay, so this is great. I'm just going to put up here that this was Starbucks.
I think too, I'm not sure how to say this, but like who they hire, like I have teenagers, so who they hire, I feel influences, like my kids always want to go to Starbucks because like that's where they want to work. Like it's so they're already loyal.
I don't even have a category in there. Some of these, in this case, because of how I created this, they might not all fit under here, but in a blank canvas, you could just, you know, have different headings.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll just create an employee.
And I think too, like although yes, it's a coffee shop, it's also kind of like a place to go hang out, a study lounge, free Wi-Fi. Like people aren't asked to like keep purchasing to be able to stay there all day. It's almost like a living room kind of setup sometimes.
Yeah, great. Okay, great.
They've
So
also kind of they've taken a stance of like social responsibility and you know, very intolerance. And so even when there's examples of when their people have blatantly not done that, they get very vocal about how they're trying to improve that.
okay, great. Okay, so now we're going to contrast this with another coffee brand. Which one? Do blue here just to make it. Tim Hortons. Contrast the difference here between the two, because we're essentially both of them, you're buying a coffee. What do you guys
I would say Tim Hortons is very accessible. Like there's way more of them and they're always really convenient, like street corners, typically easy to get in and out, more room for their drive-throughs kind of thing.
They're the only place you can get good steep tea too.
They do have a lot of products.
They've really leaned into the Canadiana aspect. So it appeals to a much broader section of the population than maybe something like Starbucks does.
And more affordable.
Pricing, correct.
yeah.
Pricing is different.
It's funny though that you would pay $6 at Starbucks, but if they asked you for that at Tim Hortons, you'd be irate and you'd leave.
But I feel like because of the point system with Tim Hortons, you lose it after a year, and it doesn't really specify that when you go on the app.
Yeah.
So you have points, and suddenly you're not using your points, but you will lose it. So
you lose Starbucks stars too. So they both sort of rip you off, I guess, in that way.
yes, yeah, I don't drink Starbucks that often, so I don't have a Starbucks where I live.
I don't use the Tim Hortons app, so I don't know very much about it.
The Tim Hortons points actually, they accumulate like really quickly. I think it's like your 6th visit, you get a free coffee. So they actually do, as the loyalty program is pretty good for actually giving you a benefit pretty quickly. It's good encouragement to keep using it.
I would
If you
say,
remember your phone, that is, when you go into Tim Hortons.
I would say that Tim Hortons is kind of trying to be everything to everyone. Like they're trying to compete with McDonald's and they're trying to compete with Starbucks.
I think it's the other way around. McDonald's is trying to compete with Tim Hortons because they're trying to bring out all the muffins and the coffees and everything else, which Tim Hortons was the first to do.
I think McDonald's is also doing that.
Yeah.
If you look at the menu options and stuff.
Yeah, it's a broader variety nowadays.
I'd also say Tim Hortons is a follower, so they aren't the ones setting the experience standard. I don't know how many years Starbucks had a loyalty program before Tim Hortons did.
Many, because Tim Hortons, it seems like they seem to change their strategy every few years, and it's been really noticeable the last 4. Like they keep trying, they try different dark roasts, and then they redo their dark roasts, and they're not quite they've like strong loyalty, but it seems to be in the things that they've always been doing, and then anything new they do seems to be very inconsistent, or maybe it's just not sticking for them, but. They're doing some really smart collaboration work though lately. Apparently their Justin Bieber stuff is really has really like increased their profitability. So
great.
And probably a new generation of customers who weren't buying coffee before.
Speaking of that new generation, I think Tim Hortons has got a different demographic. Like now that Tim Hortons coffee shops are often, especially outside of the city and rural areas, for the old farmers or the old group goes to gather and they'll just sit there and it's not expensive and they'll kind of push tables together. I just seem to see that often in a Tim's, that very different demographic, like people have their laptops open in Starbucks, but not so much at Tim's. It's like the older crowd often.
I would say that's probably why the apps and stuff like that didn't work so well.
Right, right.
I will say, as far as like coffee shops go, they are the fastest. Like they can even make your food, and you know, it's, if you're there more than 3 minutes, it's unusual, unless you're in a physical line.
I don't think they do any personalization, like where like they're
No, they don't.
that personal connection.
No.
They're not calling your names, even if they're. As often. Okay, great. So this is just a quick way to introduce you to this concept and how you could use this both for your own organization, but you can also use this template to complete a competitive analysis of one of your competitors. And when I say like a competitive analysis, I don't mean like your typical marketing-based competitive analysis. I mean, like trying to get at it and explore it from an experience perspective, and how does it feel for your customers or for your potential customers when they interact with your competitor. So we're actually going to do an exercise now. I'll just explain it and then we'll jump back over. So you're going to go into Mural. Everybody has their own little mural where they can work to define your current customer experience. And for today, we're only going to complete the strategy and tactics section. And if the categories I had here aren't right, like the brand alignment, personalization, if that isn't as relevant to your business, and most B2B will be relevant, but maybe it isn't, you could rename the category or put something else. You could, if it's too similar, like if adaptability and responsiveness, let's just say we're too similar, you could add a different category and look at it like your employee experience. Or if you have one that you know sets you apart and is not in there, you could build that in. So I'll just share this link in the chat so you guys all have it. Hold on. Perfect. And you'll see I just did it in alphabetical order. So Angela, your top left. And if you're, for the two of you that are from the same organization, for Hilltop and River Mutual, you guys can work on this together. I can put you into breakout rooms if you want to work on it together.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay. So let me take a second. I offered something that I have to figure out how to do.
And Janelle, if you could put Natalie and I in the same room too, that'd be great.
Oh, right. Yes, you have 3 sets of you that are all in. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, just give me a second. Okay, so. So Roberto, you and I are going to be together by the looks of it. There's just the 2 of us. So,
Hey.
Okay, so I'm going to create these rooms and I'll call you back when it's time. Hello, everyone. Sorry, Jennifer and Jacqueline, we got cut off mid-sentence.
That's okay.
We can pick that up after. Okay, let me get my screens all reorganized here. Okay. So just quickly, if that's all right, I would love to just do a bit of a debrief. I got to connect with 3 of the 4 groups. Sorry, Ashley and Angela, I didn't get to bop over to your group. So maybe we can just start with you and hear how were things going with your group? And did you have any questions? If you're speaking, you're on mute. We don't hear you.
Sorry, who are you asking? I didn't hear.
Ashley and Angela.
Oh, maybe Angela can do it.
Oh, no. I'm still pretty new with the company, so.
How is it going? Did you have any questions or any insights?
No, but I mean, we were kind of like brainstorming on our brand alignment because our company is still pretty new because we're still like a startup company. So we were trying to figure out what our alignment is, the personalization and our responsiveness to all our new members and current members. So, but I mean, I don't have any questions on my side.
Okay, great. You know, I just wanted to share a perspective on some of these tools that I'm sharing with you. That for me, a lot of these tools are really, it's more about the process as opposed to like the deliverable. And it's less about getting it exactly right and more about facilitating conversation or dialogue within your teams, critical thinking, intentional thinking about what you're delivering, how it's being experienced by your customers, and ultimately, what do you want to be delivering? What do you need to be delivering? So with any of these, you don't necessarily have to worry so much about, are you doing it exactly right? It's, are you asking questions? Are you learning something or thinking about your customers or your offering in a way that you haven't before? And so really just use these as kind of a stepping stone to help you think through the evolution of your CX practices. Okay. So great, we've got just 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to actually skip ahead to the CX KPIs and metrics. And I want to talk about a few of these different programs or methodologies that exist. We're going to do a deeper dive on the voice of the customer next week. But essentially, voice of the customer is a great place for you to understand what's happening with your customers, as well as identifying trends and insights. And think about your voice of the customer programs. To keep in mind is that as much as we all want to be data driven, sometimes with your voice of the customer programs, and I have this happen to me all the time, is that we have this natural tendency to want to fix the things that we hear about the most. But those may not be the most impactful. And so keep your ears open for when you hear something only once or twice, when you hear something and you think, you know what, that person has really just hit the crux of it, or they've really maybe gotten down to the root cause of the thing that you're hearing a lot of. So you may have only heard it once, but only just because you only hear something once in your VOC program doesn't mean that it isn't impactful or that it shouldn't be addressed. So thinking about that and thinking about, and we're going to dive into VOC further next week, but thinking about how you can collect that data and what your executive team is going to need. Like, what are they going to ask you? if you're bringing them insights, how data driven does it need to be? So how quantitative does it need to be versus qualitative? And so trying to think about that ahead of time can be really helpful. And then also, how can you capture qualitative feedback? And I talked about VOC as part of a CX KPI or metrics because there's so much information in there. And if you're a relatively immature organization in terms of your metrics foundations, then the VOC program will actually serve as a really strong CX KPI. So something to think about. And then there's NPS, which we've all seen. NPS is widely used. And it's the, what's your likelihood to recommend? And it's so many instances that question is not relevant. I don't know how many of you will get this when you've closed a chat or finished an interaction with someone, and it'll be, what's your likelihood to recommend Janelle as your customer success manager? Well, the way you ask these questions really will set the tone for what the response is going to be. Because when you do the NPS, for example, what's your likelihood to recommend? How you finish it? Are you going to actually ever go to a friend or family member or colleague and recommend the person at the bank that you just happen to have one call with? Probably not. And so we kind of, in the CX circles, we kind of joke about the way these NPS surveys get executed. And honestly, it's a complex measurement. And if you're not doing follow-on questions, then NPS may not be a great metric. It's something that a lot of companies do. It's easy to do in that almost every survey platform out there offers an NPS option. But it just may not, I always kind of caveat that if it's not done properly, then it may not be as insightful as some of the other KPIs or other programs out there. Also, depending on your business, like a customer sat, what's their level of satisfaction, or a customer effort score might be more relevant. I really like customer effort, just how easy is it to complete the intended task, because we know ease is one of the top drivers for customer satisfaction. So thinking about that, often people will use, or organizations will use, a combination of programs. They'll measure NPS, CSAT, and customer effort for different reasons at different points in the journey. Again, this kind of fits in with VOC, but it kind of fits in with KPIs. But thinking about, what are you going to do with this information? And customers have real survey fatigue. So if you're not going to do anything with it, then maybe don't ask your customers. And if you're not going to close the loop and let them know what you're doing as a result, maybe don't ask them. Customers are getting really smart, and they're catching on to how a lot of bonus programs and stuff are being driven by the results of these. So just be really, I think, intentional with how you use NPS, CSAT, or customer effort. I really don't use NPS all that much. I use more of like customer effort at certain points of the journey, or a customer sat, and you can modify them depending on what you're going to do with it. But those are very, very standard CX metrics. And a lot of teams will measure the health of their customer experience practice based on any combination of those three. I just kind of always say to do that with a grain of salt. I think more meaningful metrics are around the financial side and setting metrics that make sense for your team. So financial metrics could be net revenue retention, loyalty related, revenue growth. Also could be cost related or profitability related. You'll often see cost avoidance as a financial metric underneath the heading of customer experience. So thinking about what you're capable of measuring, and does it connect to CX, and is it a good indicator of the health of your CX practice?
Could you elaborate on that cost avoidance?
Cost avoidance, yeah. So a lot of times there can be costs of having like a bad customer experience. Maybe, so good examples are where it's really resource intensive. So a lot of CX initiatives will actually, when they're putting together their business case, will be cost avoidance or cost savings. So finding ways to save money and delivering a better customer experience at the same time. So implementing technology is a very common one where you're automating something, but you're automating it to make it easier, better for the customer, but also to save you high costs with often human related resources or expenditures. But yeah, you can build out your business cases for customer experience, looking at cost avoidance, cost savings, and improving your profitability, not because you're improving the top line, but because you're actually improving the bottom line. There's all sorts of.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. So for example, if we were to implement like a chat
Yes.
function on the website. So we're saying, this high volume of questions is being answered through this chatbot, which is saving us labor costs of X, which is offsetting the cost of implementation plus an ongoing cost savings.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Great,
in that
thank you.
case, like if you were, so that's a great example. So let's dive into this. So let's say you wanted to implement a chatbot. Then you could look at all of the benefits and put that into your business case. So by implementing a chatbot, does it make it easier for your customers to get a timely response? Yes. Is it faster? Yes. Do they have to wait? Or like, can they get it on demand? Yeah. So like you're achieving all of these things under, say, your strategy, but then you're also achieving financial savings as well. So then building that would help you position that investment, because there is a cost. There's going to be the one-time cost. There's going to be the total cost of ownership that you have to consider. But then if you assign, you could even start to think about a value. You could assign, we'll get into, creative ways to set your business cases, but you could assign a value of cost if like they come in at 5:05 and your team's already wrapped up for the day because they wrap up at 5, and so then they have to wait for a response until the morning because you don't have a chat bot in place or you don't have a help center in place or an online help center or something. So you could assign a cost, or that timeliness, because of your churn interviews, that timeliness or responsiveness results in churn X% of the time. So you're going to improve churn because you're going to be more timely and responsive. So you can think about, it's not only ever going to just be one thing you're probably improving. You're probably improving like five things with like technology implementations, 5 to 10 different key metrics. Okay. And then you could also just measure churn, number of customers that are staying. You could also measure their particular financial metrics. Are you able to increase total lifetime value associated with your customers? Maybe you're improving a number of years. Maybe you often lose customers after year 3, but with these CX improvements, you're now going to keep them for an additional year or year and a half. So there's a bunch of churn or loyalty related metrics that you could consider as well. Okay, scooch ahead. So for this week's learning challenge, what I was going to suggest is that you basically take what we were doing with that strategy map or that strategy canvas, the right-hand side, the strategy and tactics, but do that for one of your competitors. And if you can, try to experience it like one of their customers would. So you could just pick one particular part of their business. Like if it's a complex business and they have multiple lines of service or lines of business or products, just choose one, keep it simple, the one that most closely resembles your core business or the area that you're most interested in working on, and do a basically the same sort of competitive analysis. And as you're doing that, just pay attention to the other things that you're discovering about them that maybe you hadn't noticed before. And then as always, just, 5 to 7 minutes reflecting on what you've learned, how it applies to you, your role, any key action items maybe. And I have one video that I will add into the playlist this afternoon as well for you. Okay, so to wrap up, I'd love to do the one word close again from today's session. And I'll just start at the top of my list here. Hold on, let me just stop sharing so that I can see everybody. Oh, have you guys not been able to see my screen this whole time? Sorry about that. When we came back, I did have slides. I will make sure you guys get those. Okay. So, Vivian, do you have a one word to close?
I'm excited.
Okay, great. Excellent. And Natalie, you're next on my screen. Oh, Natalie? No, no word? Okay. Ashley? You're on mute.
One word, huh? Ponderous. I don't know. Lots to think about. So one word that means that.
Okay. Jacqueline?
I was thinking the exact same thing.
That's a great word. I haven't heard that before. Jennifer?
Motivated to get moving.
Great. Angela?
Interesting.
Okay. And Roberto?
Promising.
Great. Okay. Well, feel free to reach out if you have questions. Book in for your coaching sessions. And if there's anything, I have a few journey map things that I'll pull together for next time just to share with you based on the questions we had. But if you have any other questions, let me know. And I hope everybody has a great week.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.